So there is a clear shift in the story tonight, and this time it is not speculation or expectation, it is movement, because Iran's foreign minister is arriving in Islamabad. According to reports, the Iranian delegation is set to have bilateral talks with Pakistan, followed by trips to Oman and Russia. It feels different. The bigger picture here is simple but very important. There is a growing sense that diplomacy may be returning to the center of this conflict, and Islamabad may once again become the place where important conversations take place and where the next steps are likely to be decided. At the same time, there is still uncertainty. The United States has not yet indicated that they would be coming to Pakistan. What we are seeing publicly is only part of the picture. The real movement is happening in conversations, signals, quiet negotiations that are not always visible but are shaping the outcome step by step. This is exactly where diplomacy actually works, slowly, carefully, and often away from the spotlight. Does the arrival of the Iranian delegation lead to real talks between the US and Iran? Does it create enough trust for both sides to sit across the table again? Or does it remain an opening that still needs to be secured? That is where the story stands tonight. Some momentum is definitely building. Expectations are also rising. But now comes the harder part, turning this moment into something lasting. So the latest situation is now clear. It is developing swiftly. There appears to have been some very encouraging headway in terms of the second round of talks in Islamabad. Based on all of this now, the big question is, where do we go from here? Has enough ground been covered for the two sides to come closer to some kind of an agreement that can put an end to this conflict? To discuss this very important development, I am joined by two experts. Let me quickly introduce them and then we can dive right into the topic. Major General retired Raza, first guest. He's the diplomatic and military experience, which of course is crucial to understand, interpret, analyze and dissect this situation. Ambassador Naghmana Hashmi is also with us today. She's a former ambassador of Pakistan to the People's Republic of China, European Union, Belgium, Luxembourg and Ireland. Ambassador Naghmana, thank you so much for joining us also. General Raza, if I could just start with you. This breakthrough, I'm using the word breakthrough carefully because there have been so many U-turns and changing scenarios in this conflict that one has to be very careful. But this opening that we see now, where the Iranian foreign minister is coming to Pakistan, and obviously he would only come when he and his government is convinced that there is something to talk about. So this is a big development, and obviously the government of Pakistan's official sources in the government as well as Iranian sources are now confirming to various news organizations. What do you make of this? What do you think led to this sudden development when everything seemed to be at a standstill?
Fahd, thank you so much. I think it's a very, very important development, very positive development also. We all were looking forward to it, and the whole world, I would say. And what has happened is, what has been the catalyst? I think it has been a very, very hectic diplomacy between Pakistan, United States, and Pakistan and Iran. And also, I think few other friendly countries could have been helpful, like KSA, like Qatar, like China, I'm sure. And so many other countries of the world, they desired this outcome that Iran and America should meet again. As you know, that American security team was already here since long, and we expected that this meeting would have taken place few days back. But because of the contestation on the Strait of Hormuz and the blockade and counter blockade by America, initial blockade was by Iran, and then they opened it, which was actually acknowledged by the President Trump also. He said, we are thankful to Iran and we are having very good relations now. But they put their blockade also. And this blockade is not only of the Strait of Hormuz, but also of the Iranian port. Legally speaking, both are not correct, but they are actually resorting to the tit for tat tactics. I think, as you concluded very aptly, that there is some positive back channel development because of this. Iranians have now decided that they will come. As we said earlier, that American security team is already here, and we should soon be hearing news that perhaps their delegation is also coming. Who joins that delegation? I'm not sure, but these are the negotiations. Thank God they are recontinuing, and we should be hopeful that ceasefire continues and the negotiations go on.
Ambassador Naghmana, I think General Raza makes some very important points. I'll give you my assessment and I'll ask you to respond to that. My own assessment is that essentially I think there were two factors that were at play. One was, of course, trying to somehow find a middle ground between two extreme positions that both sides had taken. Americans saying we will not lift the naval blockade, Iranians saying we will not come for talks till you open the blockade. Now these were two rigid positions, and it was everybody was finding it difficult to find the middle ground. So either some flexibility has been displayed without announcing it publicly by both sides, A. Or B, the other factor which could combine with this would be the pressure being put by other important countries like, for example, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and especially China. So both the external pressure as well as some flexibility may have led to this breakthrough, which seemed quite implausible only a few hours ago. I would like to hear a response to that.
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me to your program. Delighted to be here. And before I respond to your program, to your question, I think not only us, but the whole world has it's a sigh of relief for everybody that finally that pregnant pause of expectation has ended, and Pakistan has very safely, hopefully, delivered the second round of talks. Now, as far as your question is concerned, I think it was a very difficult decision for Iran to blink first, because Iran had not violated the ceasefire. Iran had not started this war. So I think, like yesterday, we were discussing, and I had suggested that in order to save face, maybe the mediators could advise them to, like we do a lot of times, announce simultaneously at a certain time, at a certain date, that they would move back their blockade a little bit, and then Iran would also simultaneously open the Strait of Hormuz. But you are right, we don't know, we're not part of the negotiations, we're not in the government anymore, so we can only guess what might have happened. And I think Pakistan has played a very, very important role and has done absolutely impeccable diplomacy. And there must be a lot of back channel talks going, between us and the Americans and the Iranians and, with everybody else that we have been discussing this. And I'm sure there is some kind of an understanding that has reached, that has been arrived at, between the Americans and the Iranians. And the Iranians have decided to come back, to come to the negotiating table. And what I heard, it was on our news channels, that the American delegation is also expected to arrive tonight. They might leave tonight and may arrive, like last time they did on Saturday, Saturday afternoon. Then the negotiations or the talks could start. Having said that, if this had stretched on longer, it would have been, in my view, counterproductive for both, because brinkmanship also has its own shelf value.
Exactly.
After a while, we must understand that it's not a conflict that's just between two countries. It is a
Yeah,
conflict that has
and it is
involved the entire world,
it is
and
impacting
the
everybody.
entire world is on
Absolutely.
tenterhooks.
But I want to come back to General Raza, to what Ambassador Naghmana was saying. Obviously, some sort of an understanding has been made, and obviously we don't know so far except those people who are actually involved in this diplomacy. But what we can analyze, General Raza, is that there are two possibilities. A, that enough understanding or enough flexibility or enough compromise has been made for the two sides to at least come and sit in front of each other in Islamabad. That's the bare minimum. The other, of course, is that there is enough understanding for some kind of a framework to be signed. Now,
I think to begin with, it is going to be the second round of talks, and I am sure that some back channel diplomacy has worked, some understanding has been done, some drafts might have been shared. I do not have any knowledge, but it is just a guesswork that they might have shared the possible drafts with each other, and everybody would be commenting on that. But what is very positive and what is a good indication is that the Iranians have decided to come. As we were saying earlier, that they were to come few days back, they decided not to because of the blockade and all that. Naturally, blockade hurts them, and it was against the understanding which was reached at during the first round, that if Iranians were to lift the blockade and things were to move smoothly. I think there is some understanding. What that understanding could be, I think, joint control or some understanding on the passage of ships and the oil and gas and other commodities through Strait of Hormuz jointly. And secondly, there must be some understanding on the nuclear issue of the Iran. There must be some understanding on the ceasefire, and also the guarantees which the Iran is seeking from maybe the international interlocutors or the United Nations Security Council. But will the agreement be signed in next few days or no? One cannot say. However, the hope is that the progress has been made, and if they sit together, I'm sure that ceasefire will continue and they will reach ultimately at some good, positive, workable agreement.
which is exactly what we are looking for, and especially so in Pakistan, Ambassador Naghmana,
Yeah.
because we've invested so much into this. And there were stories coming out in the last 48 hours or so, clearly from an agenda which was saying that Pakistan has bitten off more than it can chew, that its diplomacy is hitting against a wall. I mean, all these hatchet job stories which are fed from the usual sources and are published by the usual platforms. So that actually, to me, it sounded like the daggers are out for Pakistan. But clearly, with this breakthrough, it seems that all the investment that we have done into this process is at least beginning to pay out again now. Again, having said that, we don't know where it's going to go, but this breakthrough means a lot for Pakistan also.
Yes, it means a great deal for Pakistan because since last May's conflict with India, we've come a long way, and we have now, it's a newfound importance and influence that we have not only in our region but across the world now. And as I said earlier, this is a conflict that's just not between two countries. The entire world is on tenterhooks. And there are, of course, detractors, and of course, there is the spoiler in the shape of Israel. And I have also seen a lot of fake news, a lot of propagandist tweets and memes that coming out saying Pakistan failed, or that Iran does not trust Pakistan and all that. But I think we should not really pay much heed to them because at this moment, Pakistan has the full support of everybody that matters, and which includes China, and of course that includes the Arab states, the Gulf, the European Union, and America itself. And Iran certainly has repeatedly demonstrated how grateful they are to Pakistan for their steadfast support and their role in mediation. And they also appreciate the efforts we are doing because whether it is our political leadership or the army leadership or the diplomatic leadership and the foreign office. And I would also include the responsible media because, like in the last May conflict with India, our mainstream media has played a very important role in ensuring that the correct perspective is out there and the interests of Pakistan are safe. And earlier you asked about China. So China naturally has a lot of influence. They are the China is Iran's largest trading partner, and China supported Iran way back in 2007 when there were extreme sanctions and there was no JCPOA or nothing, and they signed a 25-year deal of $400 billion for purchasing oil from and that from Iran, and that deal is still
Which,
working. And
exactly. So
of course, China,
which makes China a
and
very, very
but
important player in all of this, and which I think reinforces the point that we were discussing earlier, that there may be so many reasons and so many countries who would have convinced Iran as well as the US to come
as
to
well
this
as the US,
table.
yes, you would recall President Trump himself said that China finally convinced Iran to, come to the negotiating table and start the negotiations. But you have to also keep in mind that Mr. Trump has to go to China next month,
Yes,
and
very
this
important
has
visit.
already been once sort of postponed. And for Trump, this is an extremely important visit. They
Absolutely,
need
and
to manage not only their competition but their confrontation. And of course, um, um, American economy is suffering, and they owe the
yes.
most
So
money
that's why
to China.
that's
So I
why
think there's a
yeah,
lot at stake here.
absolutely, and that's why
So
they would want Donald Trump would want, obviously, this conflict at least, if not completely finished, at a state where he can to China and say that he's managed to end this conflict. But
the
even
Chinese,
even if he does that, General Raza, even if he does that, uh, this is indicative of new global dynamics. I mean, you obviously are a very strategic thinker, and you know how things are changing. The old order is collapsing. So this war, in
I
many
agree.
ways, it reflects this
Yes.
changing order where US as the sole hegemon now is dependent on new global dynamics, and it requires other countries, other players, big rising powers like China and middle powers like Pakistan to come and settle disputes which in the past used to be settled by the US. So this war has in many ways speeded up the transformation from the old order to what appears to be the dawn of a new order.
I greatly appreciate your conclusion and this view, Fahad sir. Excellent. There's no doubt that the world order is changing and new world order is emerging, and this new multipolar world order, middle powers like Pakistan are emerging, and Pakistan has actually been lucky and very skillful diplomatically, also using the military diplomacy, the traditional diplomacy to carve a space as stabilizer, as a country which is responsible, mature, and which is helping this region to stabilize. And it has carved a niche, alhamdulillah. And as you were saying, there are so many retractors, there are so many other countries which are working against it. At grand strategical level, I think we must understand this whole thing is linked to two things. Number one, China United States rivalry, Belt and Road Initiative, and so many other things. In case if China rises the way it is going to some way down the line, maybe after 20 years, 25, 30, 40 years, replace the biggest power which is there now, United States of America. So, second point which I want to make at the grand strategic level is the greatest contestation between all the powers for the control of energy resources and also the sea lines of communication. If you see current strategy of the United States, number one, it is hurting the Chinese interest. China is exporting about 80 to 90% oil at very, very cheaper cost from Iran. So what has happened because of the Strait of Hormuz and this war, that has been affected. Number two, uh, because of this whole thing, when the new order emerges and there will be a new regional order, security order carved out, in which Israel is likely to become the predominant power, or Iran should not remain as a challenger. So this is the basic purpose of whole the game. Now, where does the China fit in? China is trying its level best to cool down the situation and bring peace. And ultimately, I think next month when the President Trump and Mr. Xi meet, there would be some understanding on this issue also, that who is doing what, and maybe our understanding is carved out that Asia is taken care of maybe by China to some extent, and the other part of the world remains with America. But in the Middle East, we'll see a new local regional order in which American desire would be to place Israel as a predominant power, which is not challenged by other powers
But
of
that
the.
won't be that easy anymore.
It won't be. It won't be. But this whole destabilization, I would like to add, this whole destruction which has occurred, and Israel still desires, as you and the ambassador were discussing, there were retractors like Israel, and even I would add the Indian lobbyists who are sitting in United States, they're also working against it, not for the enmity of anyone else, but perhaps because of the fact that Pakistan is playing a very, very important role. And in
Now,
this war, they are now standing with Israel, not with Iran, against their old record of being non-aligned.
exactly. So it's a very tricky situation. Finally, Ambassador Naghmana, now we are assuming that talks will be underway. Hopefully. At this stage, we Pakistan started as a facilitator. We've now succeeded, at least to bring the Iranian side back to the negotiating table. Hopefully, the Americans will follow. Having spent so much time in our diplomatic service, describe to us this moment in purely in terms of the diplomatic challenge, that we are into a war which has become one of the biggest disruptors in modern times, involving a superpower. It has affected the global economy. One round of talks did not produce outcomes. We nearly went into the end of a ceasefire. Now they may be all coming back, and all through this process, one central linchpin for peace has been Pakistan. And if all of them come back to Pakistan here, what kind of a diplomatic challenge would Pakistan have to ensure that this time around there is an outcome?
Uh, uh, well, actually, to begin with, I would say that Pakistan has come of age because Pakistan has now stood up. It has shown that it is politically very strong, militarily very strong, diplomatically very astute, and now it has the patience and the wisdom to become a mediator that is being trusted. But it is a very, very difficult moment in the last, I would say, more than 55 days. But it is, our efforts started even before the war started. It started when the Americans started to indicate that they're moving their, aircraft carriers to towards Iran. We had already started engaging with leaders in the region, in the world, with China and everybody else to ensure, to at least try that the war does not erupt. But unfortunately, it did. But since the war erupted, I have not seen in my 37 years in the Foreign Office that Pakistan moved with such clarity and such unity of everybody concerned. Because it is the political leadership, the military leadership, the diplomatic leadership, the people of Pakistan, the media, everybody is standing on the same page and are strengthening the hands of diplomacy. Because you see, diplomats can only, or diplomacy can only work if the other
Yes,
elements
that is very true.
of the country are strong. And at this point in time, since last year, I think we have regained our confidence, both politically, because we, in a long time, we've seen very, very stable political
Yes.
situation in the country. Our economy is,
Of course, that's a
has
weakness.
made that huge
But
turn.
otherwise, we've shown.
And we have proven that
Absolutely.
we are a middle part
And-
and that we are not the net
And I think that's something
spoilers, but
which.
we are the
Yeah.
net
That's
stabilization
something which
is in this area.
we have also acknowledged, and I think the world acknowledging without any doubt. I'm very grateful to both our guests today for joining us. Thank you so much for your comments and your for analysis.